Okay, let's unpack this. If you're constantly, juggling deadlines, big projects, or just dealing with this nonstop information overload, you've probably felt that feeling, that sort of mental quicksand people often call brain fog. Today, we're doing a deep dive into two quite different concepts. First, that frustrating brain fog itself, and second, this natural remedy you hear a lot about for mental clarity, the lion's mane mushroom. It's quite a striking looking thing.
That's the plan. We're aiming to give you, our listener, a clear picture by cutting through some of the noise. We're digging into clinical sources on consciousness,
Yeah.
measurable science, and we'll contrast that with what academic and mycological sources tell us about Hericium arenaceus, the lion's mane mushroom. The goal here is really to establish what we know factually, what's subjective experience versus what's verified.
Yeah, and to really get a grip on the problem, that fuzzy term brain fog isn't quite enough, is it? We need the clinical term our sources use, clouding of consciousness.
Exactly. Because when people talk about brain fog, what they're often describing, clinically speaking, is a disturbance in the overall level of consciousness. They are conscious, technically, but maybe slightly less wakeful or aware than normal. And that leads directly to real difficulty in paying attention and focusing. It seems to stem from an issue with the brain's arousal system. It's not just, being tired after a late night.
Okay, so when I was looking through the sources, the descriptions of how it actually feels were really vivid and consistent. People saying their mind feels foggy, misty, almost like being in a dreamy state. There was one quote that really struck me. Someone felt awake, but in another way, not. That paradox seems key.
It really is. Because it highlights that this isn't just fatigue that, say, a cup of coffee can fix. We're potentially talking about an actual measurable issue with wakefulness and attention regulation.
Now, this is where it gets a bit more serious, maybe even a little alarming for listeners. Our sources suggest this persistent clouding of consciousness might be synonymous with something called subsyndromal delirium. Delirium sounds, well, pretty scary. Should people hearing this equate feeling sluggish with delirium?
That's a really important distinction to make. The word delirium usually brings to mind an acute, severe medical crisis, right? But subsyndromal delirium is defined a bit differently. Crucially, it's less severe than full delirium. And, very importantly, it typically lacks that sudden, rapid onset and the often brief duration you see in full delirium. It tends to be more of a chronic, sort of lower-grade disturbance in how the brain regulates itself.
Okay, so not necessarily an acute emergency, but more like a persistent background noise, a disruption that sticks around.
That's a good way to think about it. The underlying model points towards a problem in the brain system that controls our overall level of arousal or wakefulness. And when that system isn't working properly, basically every cognitive task can suffer.
Can you give us a sense of what that looks like day to day, beyond just, misplacing your keys more often?
Oh, it's much more insidious than simple forgetfulness. The absolute core clinical feature is inattention. So you just can't focus properly. You struggle to follow a conversation. Tasks that need multiple steps become incredibly difficult. This state can impair perception. It slows down mental speed, affects learning, executive functions. We also often see abnormalities in thought processes. Thoughts might feel disorganized or just really slow. And issues with comprehension and language, too. Understanding complex stuff becomes a real struggle. It's like the whole mental engine is running slow.
Wow, it sounds like it really hijacks the brain's ability to process things effectively.
It really does. And this leads us to a really critical distinction we need to make clear for you. This state clouding of consciousness, or this subsyndromal delirium, it's not the same thing as mild cognitive impairment, or MCI.
Okay, how are they different? Because I imagine subjectively they might feel a bit similar, sometimes struggling mentally.
That's true, but the underlying issue is different. MCI is generally considered a dementia-like impairment. It primarily affects memory and higher-level thinking. But the key thing is, MCI, by definition, does not involve a disturbance in that fundamental arousal or wakefulness. People with MCI are typically fully alert. They're awake and aware. They just have trouble accessing or forming memories efficiently. Clouding of consciousness, however, is defined by that disturbance in the level of wakefulness and attention. If you can't pay attention properly in the first place, you can't effectively form the memory. That's the core difference.
That distinction, arousal versus memory impairment, that really clarifies things. Thanks. So, if someone is experiencing that clinical level of fog, that measurable lack of arousal, the desire for some kind of relief must be huge, which naturally leads people to look for solutions, maybe outside of conventional paths. And that brings us neatly to this fascinating fungus that's become so popular in the wellness world, Hericium arenaceus.
Yes, a really intriguing organism. And quite a contrast to the clinical complexities we were just discussing.
Mm.
Here we have something tangible from nature.
It goes by so many cool names, too. Lion's mane is the common one, obviously. But then there's hotugo, that's Chinese for monkey head mushroom, apparently.
Yeah, yeah.
And my favorite is yamabushitake. That references Japanese mountain ascetics, right? Which kind of hints at focus or mental discipline.
It does, doesn't it? And the look of it explains the names. It usually grows as this single big shaggy clump, like a dense bulb covered in these long hanging spines, maybe 1 to 5 centimeters long. It genuinely looks like a mane or a beard.
Where does it typically grow?
It's native to North America and also Eurasia. You usually find it growing on hardwood trees, things like beech, maple, oak. It's typically saprophytic, meaning it feeds on deadwood, causing this specific type of decay called white pocket rot.
And interestingly, it has this dual identity, doesn't it? Both as a potential remedy and just as food.
Absolutely. It's considered a choice edible mushroom. People use it in gourmet cooking. And nutritionally, it's quite solid. About 57% carbohydrates, including fiber, only around 4% fat, and a decent amount of protein, about 22%.
But the traditional use, that's where things get really interesting when you compare it to today's focus. We hear about it for the brain now.
Right, but historically, its documented use in traditional Chinese medicine, going back centuries, was primarily as a remedy for chronic stomach ailments.
Stomach issues, not brain fog.
Primarily stomach conditions, yes.
Yeah.
That's a key point. The traditional focus seems quite different from its modern cognitive applications.
Okay, that is a big jump from gut health to brain support. So let's get into the chemistry, because that's presumably why it's become such a star in the modern nootropic scene, right? What are researchers actually looking at?
That's where we dive deeper. The mushroom contains quite a mix of phytochemicals. There are polysaccharides like beta-glucans, which you find in lots of mushrooms. They're known for immune support, generally. But then you get these compounds that are thought to be more unique to lion's mane, hericenones and erinacines.
Ah, yes, hericenones and erinacines. Those are the names you always see on the packaging or in articles. What's the thinking behind why those specific compounds are important for the brain?
Well, the hypothesis, and it is still largely a hypothesis in terms of proven human effect, is that they might act as potent inducers of something called nerve growth factor, or NGF, especially the erinacines, which are found more in the mycelium, the sort of root structure.
Nerve growth factor. What does that do?
NGF is really crucial for the health of our neurons. It helps with their maintenance, their survival, and even their regeneration. So the idea, the hope, really, is that these compounds could potentially encourage the growth and differentiation of brain cells. It's the proposed mechanism behind the claims you see for improved cognitive clarity, better attention, memory support.
Okay, that sounds incredibly promising. A natural compound that might help rebuild or support our neurons. Who wouldn't be interested in that? But, as always, compelling ideas often meet the cold, hard reality of scientific validation.
Precisely. And this is probably the most important takeaway for you, the listener, when you're evaluating any kind of supplement, not just lion's mane. Studies have been done. There's research out there, and some early results, particularly in lab settings or animal models, look interesting. There are even some small human trials, often focusing on people with existing mild cognitive impairment. However, and this is the big caveat from the scientific sources we consulted,
Okay, what's the current scientific consensus?
the consensus right now is that Hericium erinaceus, as a supplement, currently lacks sufficient high-quality scientific evidence to definitively prove its safety or effectiveness for cognitive enhancement in healthy humans. Basically, those alleged medicinal benefits for focus, memory, clarity. They just aren't reliably proven yet according to rigorous scientific standards.
Right. So why the gap? If the chemistry seems promising and there are some studies, why isn't the proof stronger?
There are a few likely reasons. First, many of the human studies are small, they might lack rigorous controls, or their results haven't been consistently replicated. We need larger, more robust trials. Second, and this is a huge issue for you as a potential consumer, is the variability in the products themselves. The actual amount of those key compounds, the hericenones and erinacines, can vary massively depending on how the mushroom was grown, harvested, processed, and stored.
Ah, so the supplement someone buys might not actually contain what the promising lab study used.
Exactly. If you're testing a product that's mostly filler or wasn't processed in a way that preserves those active compounds, you're unlikely to see the same effects. This inconsistency in processing and labeling is a major headache. It means study results often conflict, making it really hard to draw firm conclusions about whether it works or even what the right dose might be.
That creates a real challenge, doesn't it? If you're feeling that fog and looking for something natural, you're drawn to this mushroom with its fascinating history and interesting chemistry, but you're stepping into a market where the actual effectiveness isn't guaranteed from bottle to bottle.
That sums it up perfectly. It's the gap between a plausible mechanism
Mm-hmm.
and, verified, repeatable results in humans.
Yeah.
We know the compounds exist. We have the traditional use context, mainly for the gut, remember, but the specific modern claims for a cognition haven't cleared that high bar of scientific proof yet.
So bringing this all together, this deep dive really throws that contrast into sharp relief. On one side, we have clouding of consciousness. It can be a real clinical issue, sometimes linked to subsyndromal delirium, defined by measurable problems with arousal, attention, thinking clearly, a documented challenge.
And then on the other side, we have lion's mane. Beautiful mushroom, interesting compounds like hericenones and arenosines, historically used for digestion, now heavily marketed for the brain based on that potential NGF connection. But critically, its effectiveness for cognitive benefits in humans remains scientifically unconfirmed due to the lack of large-scale evidence and issues with product consistency.
Yeah, it seems our journey today really underlines how important it is to understand the edges of what we know. You need to understand the clinical reality of the fog you might be experiencing, if it is indeed clinical. And then you need to apply some critical thinking to the evidence behind any potential solution, especially supplements.
Absolutely. And maybe the final thought to leave you with is about distinguishing that feeling, that subjective sense of being foggy from a defined clinical condition. Nature offers amazing chemistry. Traditional practices offer centuries of wisdom. That's fascinating. But for truly nurturing your brain health, that critical lens is paramount. Thinking about efficacy, consistency, product quality, that's crucial.
Yeah.
It's about seeking out the verifiable information, not just latching onto the most compelling